All right, well let's get into The Last of Us 2.
Yay!
I want to know your thoughts first.
I thought it held up from the last episode. I thought it was really good.
Okay.
Really good episode.
I actually agree. Quite.
Maybe even better.
I think it was better. I
do have one minor complaint.
Okay.
Two minor complaints with it.
There's some nitpicky type stuff, and this is what I really do to a degree mean kind of nitpicky things about just stuff they decided to change. So I was made aware by someone who commented that they're not doing the spores in this. And then it turns out that the guy, I should probably learn this dude's name. It's the guy who directed Chernobyl, who's I think he's one of the showrunners for this. He was saying that they decided not to do the spores, and his reasoning was that spores travel, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to use them because it brings in too many like open potential like. Sorry,
you say the spores.
So okay,
I'm not familiar with that.
So we talked about this. Sorry, we talked about this last week. In the game,
viral.
Yeah, so in the game,
transmission.
Yeah, so in the game, the cordyceps, like when you know how you see like all the bodies like pile up and the fungus has spread. So in the game, that can produce spores in certain places. Now, I had always thought that for the most part in the game, they made it pretty clear that it was usually like dark, places that are typically away from everything. And I think that would have been Craig Madsen. Thank you, Zax. I thought that would have still worked because again, this is just it's sci-fi stuff where you just go,
right.
The spores can't survive in the sunlight or something. It's pretty simple that you can just add this little thing that it's like, hey, typically the only places you where you find them is in these dark places, and it's something that is scary because you have to wear a gas mask, otherwise these things will infect you and you'll die, and you'll like essentially become one of these things. And so I think they should have kept it in.
How many gas masks do you have to wear?
Just one. Why would you? Anyway, it was one of those aspects of the show that I really wish they had decided
That's
to keep.
Odd.
Yeah, because it works, and I think it works.
Added tension.
Huh?
It's added tension and stakes too.
Yeah, and it's a cool aspect of what makes the cordyceps different from
The
other
Walking
zombie
Dead.
infection type stuff. Where with this, they're leaning really hard into just their
Biting and
zombies.
scratching.
Yeah, and then I guess you can make out with an infected and also get infected.
I guess we'll get to that scene when we get there to that scene. But since we're already there, I guess
sorry, Zax is right though. He says, "Let's be honest, Pedro didn't want to wear a mask again." Yeah, I was wondering if the gas mask thing is just like this, like masks in general are just a problem in Hollywood right now where nobody wants to wear them because it's like, well, I'm the star, I don't want to put one on, but it's like you're an actor.
That's dumb.
Yeah. So I don't know. We can't say for sure, but it's definitely possible.
It would be dumb if that's true.
But yeah, I thought this episode was really good. It is surprisingly accurate to the game. This specific episode, I agree with most of the stuff that they actually. They didn't. It's not as much change there. I think that, and we'll get to it. But the climax of the episode, not 100% bought into that. Like I think it works fine, but that's not how it happens in the game. And when we get there, I'll kind of explain why. But for the most part, I thought it was a solid episode. I'm trying to really do my best to look at this as like something that isn't already an existing property that has a story that is borderline the same thing. The only other problem I have with this is that I know where this is going, and not like where this season is going, where the story goes.
It is just like,
and I'm like,
hopefully they'll change that. Probably not. He'll probably double
No,
down.
the theory is that they're going to try to make it line up better with The Last of Us 2. That's what everybody is like. Just they're like, this show's pretty good. It's like it's a pretty faithful adaptation, and then they're like,
just don't be faithful to this point.
Yeah, and I just don't. I was surprised that they. I honestly, I've been surprised that they followed it as closely as they have. So yeah, I think that there's like one section. So the section of this episode where they go into the building and then it doesn't work, and then they go into the old museum.
Yeah.
So they're kind of combining two scenarios from the game into one kind of like set piece, sort of, where it's like, oh no, this doesn't work, so we have to go do this. It's not exactly how it happens, but I think it works pretty well because it helps with the pacing of the show. So that you're not like, well, we go into this building and now we're out of it. It's like we have this encounter and then we're out of this building and then we go into another building and then there's another encounter. They were like, no, let's have them go in a direction that doesn't work for them, and then they're going in a new direction, and that's where they run into the clickers, and then that leads into everything that happens at the end of the episode. I thought that worked pretty well for something where they are trying to kind of like, you got to keep the audience interested. Like you can't just kind of have these like ebbs and flows for an hour like that.
Yeah, and repeat the same type of product too.
Yeah, so
episode. But let me correct one thing. Whoever commented that was wrong. Was right up until 2 days ago when Craig Mazin came out and said that Spores might be making an appearance in the future. So
he said in the thing at the end of this episode that they didn't want to use the Spores. So
that's according to the gamer.
He needs to make up his mind if that's the case.
He said it was less about, the Spores don't work, because I have to say you may see Spores yet. It's not so much that they can't exist in this world. It's really more like when a character is transmitting this to another character, what can we do that's slightly different than just chomp?
You can do Spores.
Spores.
That's... Maybe they're just like saying that stuff so that they don't spoil things, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about showrunners and stuff like that.
They're trying to beat around the bush, so to say.
Yeah. They're saying things that's like, a lot of people, including me, thought that they were not going to be very accurate to the games, or at least they weren't going to attempt to do certain things. And it's been... it's been surprising to see how they have, at least in certain instances, I mean, it's almost like one for one. Like the dialogue is taken directly from the game.
Yeah.
So some of that has been really surprising. But yeah, let's get into it. What did you think of this opening?
I enjoyed the opening.
Yeah.
I thought it made you get this. You're first off, great job HBO with the world building in this show. They do a really good job with, I guess you could say fantasy. You would probably have to say they're the top fantasy, streaming service, in my opinion, when you consider the other ones suck so bad.
Yeah.
But the world building in this is very well done, and we get this shot in the city in Indonesia. And immediately you're transported into this restaurant. The police come in, and you're like,
yeah.
What does she, for me, not knowing, what does she have to do with it? And you start assuming things. Okay, well, maybe she's some kind of scientist or whatnot. Come to find out, she's a professor of, what was it again? Microbiology or something like that?
She studies the fungus. We'll just keep it at that. It may say it because there is subtitles for this part.
Mycology or something.
Yeah.
But, and so, I thought it was a good setup, and then also payoff later on the episode 2 with this. And I did think my problem with this opening scene is, man, they hovered on that woman's
naked lady, the dead lady,
so long.
It's like, oh my gosh,
it's just like, guys, just all next 10 minutes, just focus. Like,
all I was thinking was like, oh man, now I gotta like do editing for this. I was like, I gotta cut all this out for YouTube. But yeah, so I was
It's a simple setup and payoff.
Yeah, I was a little concerned at first because I'm like, why are we back in present day?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what else are you going to show us? But I was okay with this, and what really got me. So she gets basically taken in. I'm assuming this by the government to look at what is the cordyceps virus. And she goes in to study this woman, and she finds the fungus in her mouth, and the fungus starts like moving or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the thing that got me was this part right here, where she's sitting and she knows
Yep.
what's going on. It's very clear to her what the outcome of all of this is, and it's really interesting because she said he basically asks her. The guy that picked her up in the restaurant or the cafe asks her what can be done about this situation. He's like, is there a vaccine? Is there something that we can get to stop this? And she's like, you don't understand. Like, there's nothing. And then, where is it? She says, oh, yeah, they go through the whole, like, thing about the different people. There's no medicine. There's no vaccine. And he's like, so what do we do? And she says, start bombing. Bomb the city and everything in it. So two things are good about this. You had asked last week how those buildings ended up like that. Well, that's how they ended up like that. I think that is accurate to the games. Can't remember everything. And then their conversation, try to remember this, may or may not be important for later on in the season. It may or may not be a necessary conversation later on in the season, okay? So this scene could be setting up for something that happens down the road.
Right.
It may or may not. Kind of just depends.
I enjoyed his reaction, and you see one of the things I appreciate about the actress in this is the subtle emotions of wanting to let everything out, but she has to be somewhat reserved in explaining everything. And she does a good job of trying to withhold emotion, then release it, and going back and forth.
She's like, she's just accepted her fate.
Yep.
Which is very, very interesting.
And she's just like, hey, will you please take me so I can go be with my family?
Okay. So
design and production design on this, great.
Yeah.
Really good job.
Okay. So I guess this is probably a good time to talk about this. I think Bella Ramsey is the weak point in this show.
Yep, that's what I was going to say was my biggest problem is that I had from the last episode carried over to this episode, which is I think it's too much acting, like over the top. And then not only that, but her character, like I understand she's, I don't know if even rebellious is the right word, but just, not wanting to follow them, which follow their orders, Joel and Tess, which makes sense because, she's being held against her will. But at the same time, it's just annoying, like it's just, there's so many moments where she's just dropping F-bombs for the sake of dropping F-bombs where it doesn't really make sense. Whereas, you cut to the next scene to where Tess is walking up the stairs and, she's like, you try walking up the stairs at our effing age or whatever our effing needs. And that makes sense. But with her, it's just like, I'm going to cuss just because I'm a cool kid.
Yeah. So I think it's twofold for me. One, I think they did a disservice not letting her be closer to Ellie from the games. Ellie in the games is very kind of chipper for the most part. Like, she seems to be a pretty happy person. She has that she's spunky, I guess might be a good way to explain it. She's got a little bit of that rebellious side. Her and Joel have issues in the beginning, which they're trying to do in this, but it's really weird because this version, Bella Ramsey's version of Ellie, will have moments like that. Like we'll get to it. Actually, we can just go ahead and jump to it, where they talk to her about all of this stuff. They have the conversation about her being bit, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and they finally decide that they're gonna take her. And you see a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, where it's just like she seems really angry. She's just like cursing at him all the time. There is this moment where her and Tess seem to be kind of like forming a bond. A little different from the games. I'm okay with it. Wish they would have pushed it a little bit harder in this episode, considering
what happens at the end.
And I liked a lot of the stuff where she's asking them, she's like, oh, is it true that like there's an infected that can like shoot spores at you or whatever? And then is it true that one of them, its face looks like it's open and it has the hearing of a bat? And then the way the two of them just like look at each other, it's really good. Problem is, in this environment, the two of them should have been very upfront with her about what they were possibly going to get into, especially considering what happens later on. It's a little bit like, you guys should have said it. Yeah. Now, what I was getting at was that when they come in here, when they first get into the hotel, she's like, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden she becomes like this childish girl again. This is very Ellie from the games, where you'll like, there's and I don't know if they'll do it in the next episode. It's not really much of a spoiler, but after this scenario of this episode happens in the games, you go to see, like, they're going to see this guy Bill, which I think they mention in this episode. And in his like town that he's sort of living in, Ellie finds a record store, and she's just like obsessed with the records. There's like an old arcade machine that's not working that she's really interested in. So she's very curious. And her personality kind of, and now again, we could begin to see a change in her in the next episode, and that might still work. And maybe they're just not, maybe this specific part of the story with Ellie in the show just isn't landing quite right for either of us.
Right.
But it is very weird. That's like, she's doing this, things seem to be good, and then she'll have a conversation with Joel like 5 minutes later, and she's just pissy again.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Like, I don't know. Ellie from the games was much more kind of wide-eyed about everything that was going on, despite like knowing the danger. Like, she was aware of a lot of these things. There's stuff that happens to her along the way that kind of makes her have to grow up pretty quick. But at the same time, it's one of those things where she's still a kid. She still has that going on. And I see what they were going for here, but it feels very like separated from the other moments where she just seems like she's pissed off the whole time.
Yeah. And like, hey, I guess I got to a point to where I was just thinking, we understand you hate them. Like,
yeah,
got it. And again, there's times where it works, where she's being a sarcastic, she's being smart with them, right, and sarcastic with them, and I don't care what you think, whatever. I went to a crappy school. What do you think? Things that work within the storyline. Then there's other moments where I just went where it just kind of took me out. Even that moment took me out because I was kind of thinking, well, if they're in this, obviously there's a risk to their lives. They're holding guns right now. So there's a threat, and you don't know how close or far away that threat is to you, but you know where you're going into a city with infected. So why would you, even if you wanted to make the excuse for her running up to the bellhop, the ding the bell and everything, why would Joel or Tess, before she even gets to that point, tell her to stop? You know what I mean? Because you don't know what's around the corner. It just seemed very...
And that's kind of the way I thought it was going to go.
It would be one thing if they had their backs turned or something.
Yeah.
Or, there's something that distracted them. I don't know.
They kind of just let her do it.
Yeah. It seemed odd to me.
They dropped their guard a little bit.
If I'm in that point, I'm being like, yo, chick, I'm saying, stop. Don't do that.
Yeah, and it's I understand what they were going for. I think maybe they could have found another way to do it. It would have been really funny. You know how those kind of bells, eventually they just stop working properly?
Yeah.
It would have been pretty cool if like the bell just didn't work properly. So it's like it stays within it, and then you see like Joel, he like tenses up when she does it, and then it doesn't work properly. And he's like, and then he kind of he's able to let her continue doing what she's doing until she finds that skeleton and keeps going. Yeah.
Right.
I'm with you on that.
The frog on the piano, though, I thought that was
I did,
funny.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of the B-roll shots with like the ducks playing in the water, and
Yep.
yeah, there's a lot of that stuff that I think works pretty well just for setting the scene of the world that they live in. So they get trapped and they're trying to find their way around because they're given basically they have two options. They can go the long way or they can go the way that basically leads to them dying. And
they chose the long way.
They chose the long way, and then it turns.
And that was I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a good moment of her being smart with them and being like, well, based on that limited information, I'll go with the path that doesn't lead to death.
Yes, and I think that's when it works. And so I still think that Bella Ramsey's the weak part of this, but I'm honestly not sure if that's her or if it's the script. Like if it's the direction, because Neil Druckmann directed this episode, the guy who wrote The Last of Us, the game. So he knows Ellie, and it's very odd to me that this is the direction that they're kind of going with her.
Yeah.
And again, it's why I'm worried that what they're really trying to do is just slowly push her in line to be a little bit more ready for The Last of Us 2, more so than what they originally created in the first game.
Okay.
Because she's young, she's innocent, she's basically been
in school her whole life, right?
Exactly, yeah. She's been pretty sheltered, and so now she's getting to see the outside world for the first time, and so there should be this. She does not understand the danger that they're going into yet. She does not fully understand it. She understands a little bit because of some stuff that I think they'll get to later on in the season with some of her backstory.
Yeah.
But there is still this part of her that, like, she was lucky enough to survive her encounter with an infected. She was unbelievably lucky that she happens to be immune to the cordyceps.
Right.
And dear Lord, I hope they never try to explain why. Because it's never explained in the games, and I think it would be a massive disservice if they tried to
explain why she's immune.
Yeah, just let that be a thing. Just let it exist. It's totally fine that it's a thing. It's a pretty common trope in stuff that it's like someone happens to be like immune or have like this special thing that sets them apart from everybody else.
Right.
So the casting didn't help. She doesn't look young and innocent, but it was better this episode. Yeah, I agree. I think that's part of her problem, though. She looks young to me. I didn't realize she was 19.
Yeah.
She doesn't look like a 19-year-old at all.
They did a good job of de-aging her down for the role for a 14-year-old.
Yeah, their makeup department, I guess, did a pretty good job. But yeah, I think it was probably poor casting, and I've pretty much been saying that since before the show came out.
Yeah. I think that's the main gripe most people had was, even with Joel, was poor casting that I had heard before the show came out. I don't, have any knowledge about Joel from the game, so I enjoy Pedro's performance so far. If there's anything that stood out that's been like, oh, this is bad, it's been pretty good.
He's trying.
Standard acting.
His Texas accent kind of comes and goes. Like sometimes he sounds like Pedro Pascal, and sometimes he sounds like he's from Texas. It's not an easy thing to pull off. But it turns out that the way that they were planning on going is, I keep wanting to say zombies, even though I know that they're technically they're not zombies. But the infected are blocking their way. This is where they have that conversation that'll come into play later on, where it's basically a system of roots almost, and that they're all connected that way, like a hive mind. Totally fine with that. I think it fits in pretty close to the lore.
It's kind of like a spider web too. If you hit one, you know how with a spider web, if it's on, no matter where it's at, if you hit the thread, it's coming. So it has that note to it as well. But this time you get the whole hive. Yeah,
they're not. I don't think they're like 100% a hive mind in the game. I don't think there was anything that ever completely backed that up. It's more of the way that the individual fungus affects each one of them. Because I think even in the game, some of them never turn into clickers. Some of them don't, turn into some of these other grotesque creatures you meet along the way.
Right.
it's fine. I mean, like it's one of those things that it's a change where I'm like, all right. But the thing is that they said that this is kind of what they were trying to do instead of the spores at the end. You know how they do those like recaps at the end. That's what he was like getting at. Was like, okay, we wanted to try something different that seemed like it made it was a little more grounded, I guess. Though I don't know why the spores thing is so like. It was such an absurd thing to them.
Grounded.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna stop being upset about it, but it's one of those.
I get it. I mean,
it's just one of those things that's like, all right. And then the thing that could potentially be a problem with this new thing that they're doing is like, will this concept of if you like step on a live piece of fungus, will this carry over long term, or will they just throw it away after this episode is over and pretend like it's not that big of a deal and we kind of go back to a zombie show for the most part, you know what I mean? But yeah, I thought so this is still a great set piece for the show. It's pretty accurate to the game, which is still kind of blowing my mind. This episode in particular, I was like, dang, man, like it was like the attention to detail with what they were doing, not only like the way that everything is designed, but also how accurate it is to the game. I was just like, I mean, I got to give them props.
You're blown away.
I got to give them props, good. Man. I still have issues with stuff that they did in the first episode. But
this was a step in the right direction.
This is a step in the right direction. I'm telling you though, man.
That's good, man. I was excited.
I'm waiting to see at this point. I want to know where that peak is before I go, uh-oh.
Kind of like with House of the Dragon, right? You're just each episode, you're like, where's the peak? Where's that cliff?
Except I know where the drop off is, and that's kind of what I'm waiting for. Is like, it's the difference in a roller coaster where you can see the drop off coming and one where you can't. And this one, I know where it is. I'm just waiting.
Oh man.
But yeah, I thought they did a really good job with this. It's a great setup for the clickers. Did you know what they looked like?
No, I had no idea.
You had no idea. So we can go ahead and like get to it. Was there anything in particular about this part though that you wanted to talk about?
I enjoyed. I think her stepping on the hand was a great reminder of she's still a kid. She's gonna mess up and get things wrong.
Dude.
You know what I mean? And then Joel ends up doing it in a way, a bit later on to where it makes sense to where he steps on the glass.
Yeah.
And so it's a good sequence of both of them making the same mistake, just in a different way.
Yeah. And one of the biggest complaints people had about the game when it came out is that like Ellie's AI was ridiculous. She would just take off towards enemies. So she's basically invincible for the most part. Like she can get grabbed and you have to save her at certain moments. Right. But a lot of the stuff that affects Joel in the game, it's almost like she's not 100% there. So you'll be like sneaking around and all of a sudden you'll see Ellie just go like sprinting by you and you're like, what are you doing? And she'll be right in front of the enemies. And then it's like, they don't even notice she's there because they're not the way that the AI is like designed. You're the only thing they're really picking up on for the most part.
That's funny.
When I've been playing through it again, I was like, oh, I forgot about this. It's like, golly.
That's hilarious. That's annoying.
Yeah. So, at least in this, she acts more appropriate, which makes sense because it's not a video game. But yeah.
I like how decayed and worn out and ready to fall apart everything seems to be. The decomposing with the buildings and just everything else and how nature has taken over some too works really well. So I think just going back, I can't compliment the set pieces enough. Like you could see the thought and care put into it. And it's just, when you have to watch that 90s show and not have to, but when you do, because people mislead you, and other shows like Halo from last year, when people put in care and
Halo's a great
into the details.
Yeah.
This, I want to call it out and just profusely show my appreciation.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, The Last of Us is just far and away better than Halo. Like, it's not even close. I mean,
we don't even have to talk about it.
I know. It's so funny to see. I had heard someone mention this, but Halo is like flagship Microsoft IP.
Right.
The Last of Us, in a lot of ways, is a flagship Sony IP, and Sony is just taking so much more care in what they're doing. For now, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting.
Where's that cliff?
I'm not going to get too excited, man, just because I know. I
enjoyed the tenseness of this scene right here, dude.
Yeah.
Them going through the museum. And was this Independence Hall or?
I'm not sure if they ever actually said. I thought it's
there was
kind
a glimpse that showed it was Independence Hall. Troll Room, you can help me.
Oh, wait.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Independence Hall. Yeah, you're right. Yep. It's right here.
That's cool. So you got from the Founding Fathers, that timepiece era, and boom, got some clickers in there.
Yeah, so it's the way that they're revealed is pretty great, and I appreciate this for the sake of people who had no idea what was about to happen. So they come in here and you hear the noises first. Very accurate. Very accurate. Like, this is, I think for a lot of people who have played the game, the introduction of the clickers was one of those things that just sticks with them. They're very, they set them up as being very dangerous. In the game, they're basically like a one-hit kill. Like, if they grab you, you're pretty much dead if you don't have a way of stopping them.
They did a great job in this show of making the clickers a real active threat. It wasn't just, how in The Walking Dead, it was headshot, boom, done.
Yeah. Yeah, that everyone has auto aim to the head in The Walking Dead.
Yep. That cheat code. Whereas here it's more realistic, shooting in the body, and shooting them in the body, it gets them away from you, but they're coming back.
Yeah, they have this shot of them in the hallway coming. So like
and you just see the terror on Ellie's face, like,
there it is.
Crap.
Yeah. And
you kind of see that innocence go away from her, and also that pissiness and how much she has to rely on Joel and Tess.
All of a sudden she realizes like how bad things are. She's never encountered something quite like this before. And just how the two of them are both like, this is bad. Because they know how dangerous these things are.
Even though it probably would have been stupid, I thought it would have been funny if after he lost his weapon, his rifle, if he would have grabbed at some point one of the muskets and it would happen to be loaded and he just shot the clicker with it. That would have been ironic.
So yeah, you're starting to get a little bit more of a glimpse, and then you get this shot of the clickers.
And are they just supposed to be supersonic hearing infected?
Yeah, so they're blind, but they have like unbelievably good hearing. And one of the things I think the show does really, really well is just like how quiet you have to be. Because you see it. This is pretty cool. So like this thing comes up, and
because all she did go.
She breathed in too hard, and the thing knew where she was, and that's so good with setting up how dangerous they are. Really, really, really good. And then there's another one that comes in. His
best friend comes.
Yep. Joel gets some shots at it, but it doesn't kill it, which is great.
The test fired like one shot.
Yeah.
Man. This was a good tense scene here.
Yeah, I think this whole scene works really, really well. The sound design, like in the way that they implemented it for the clickers, it's always been good, but the fact that they were able to do it so well for the show is awesome. And then
when he steps on the glass,
and you're like,
you knew it was coming.
And he's like, I cannot believe there's like part of me that thinks he was going, I can't believe I just screwed up in front of her. Like, because he's with Ellie, he's like, I just made.
Especially after like her stepping on the the infected dried up hand or arm.
Yeah. And it works though, because of course they're in a tense situation, so you're not exactly thinking properly.
Not paying attention to all your surroundings.
Yeah.
It shows how easy to going forward, the stakes involved, how everything can flip on a dime just from one simple mistake.
Yeah. Takes it out. Other one comes through. They take that one out. It's great.
And as soon as Tess said she twisted her ankle, I'm like, she got bit.
I was wondering if you, because I was wondering when you would have thought. So in the game, Ellie doesn't actually get cut, but I guess they want to like definitively show. I guess they wanted to definitively show the audience like, hey, she can't get infected. Like it's not, we're not screwing with you. This isn't like a she's immune to the virus, or excuse me, to we'll call it an infection.
Joel to like,
oh
hey,
yeah,
she really is immune, because he still doubts it, even though she's lived so far, even after the markings of being infected. Like, hey, you see him when he says test, maybe the second time will infect her. Interestingly
enough, the reason that he finds out in the game is because they go down to where the spores are and she doesn't put a mask on because she's immune, so she doesn't have to. So again, kind of, I'm a little bitter about the spores. I feel like at this point, if they show up, it's going to be like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, but yeah, I mean,
as soon as Tess said I twisted my ankle, I said to my wife,
her attitude changes.
Nah, she got bit, girl.
Yeah.
She got bit, which made this scene even more meaningful when Tess snaps at Joel and said, "Can't we just have a win for once?" I get it. I'd be a bit aggravated too.
Some good cinematography in this. I thought all of their backdrops, even though most of this is probably all of this is pretty much computer generated. Mm-hmm. I think this show looks good. That's one thing HBO does pretty well with all of their stuff. Like visually, it's always going to be a step above what you're getting at Netflix, what you're getting at even on Disney and some of these other places. Like there's a quality to the way that they produce their shows. Yeah, that I really appreciate.
Even more so than Amazon.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. Amazon kind of went downhill.
Yeah,
I think they tried it first.
Maybe Henry Cavill will be the one to bring it back.
We'll see.
With the Warhammer.
Yeah, everyone at this point kind of knows something's wrong with Tess.
Yeah.
Poor Tess. You kind of get this moment where
this heartfelt moment between both of them.
Yep, where they're starting that little bit of, okay, maybe they can get along. Maybe there's something there. This, by the way, it's a term that I was trying to remember. The scenario or the writing sort of trope of the old grizzled character and the kid. They call it the wolf and cub. That's sort of like that's the term that gets used a lot with these kind of scenarios.
And Tess just comes because she's really macabre right now, and it's just like, hey, let's get going.
Yeah, well, she's motivated to get this over with. Yeah,
because she's gotten bit.
Yeah, and you're right. He sees that she's got that wrapped on her arm.
And nothing's happening to her.
And she seems to be completely fine.
When I watched it the second time, it had a time, like, obviously we don't know the exact moment where Tess got bit, but clearly it was before she showed up. But I wanted to time it because she got bit on her neck. And if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you get bit on the neck area from the first episode, didn't I say 10 to 15 minutes?
It's supposed to be pretty quick. Yeah, that's why they should not have done that. Because that's not how it was. That's why in the game they're like, it takes 1 to 2 days. Because and it's something I was saying before. It's worse that getting infected takes a significant amount of time. Because if you get bit and you have 24 to 48 hours before you turn and you know it's coming, that's terrifying. Whereas if it's a pretty instant transition, there's almost no time to really deal with everything. It's just like, it's just too late. So you're right. They did seem to. I think it was a misstep on their part, and I'm going to stake my flag in this hill on how they did the infection.
Time wise, it works out in the show. So.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, because when the second viewing, I was like, I'm going to pause it as soon as she shows up.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, so let's do it a few minutes beforehand. It still works out. It's on the line, but it works out.
What you'd really have to do is go from
Zach's in the rooms that didn't bite Tess and then let her go.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
she, like the clicker wasn't dead.
That's a really good point. That thing it establishes what happens if that thing catches you. And she was all by herself. So that's interesting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like in the games, like those things catch you and they basically tear a chunk out of your neck, and then it goes try again.
No, that's a really good point, though. How, I guess, did she escape? Because, she didn't, there's no gunshot that went off.
Not that I remember.
Yeah.
It's accurate to the game because you do get split up at this point in the game, but it's a regular infected that gets her in the game. It's not a clicker.
Okay.
So in that scenario, it's reasonable enough to think that she fought it off, was able to like deal with it. Not to mention, and I'm kind of surprised they didn't do this in the show, shanks are a thing. So they specifically create shanks in order to deal with these situations where like you get grabbed by an infected, specifically clickers. You can use that, stab it in the head, and it'll kill it. So it would have been nice if they had established that was a thing. So I guess, if you wanted to give the show the benefit of the doubt, you could just be like, well, that's what she did, even though we have no established thing for that.
It came back.
But oh yeah, you're right, it did come back. So even then, it wouldn't have mattered. They're on hard difficulty, Joseph. On hard difficulty, you have to do it a couple times.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I enjoyed this scene too. They look and they're like, "Ah, crap, they're not there."
Yep.
Of course.
Yeah, they've been taken out, and it's they basically talk about this. This changed to
really just one more thing. When it rains, it pours.
Tess is still great in this part because she's becoming more and more desperate. They changed it from it's Fedra in the game. Mm-hmm. So the thing that's weird about this, right? And going back and sort of watching some stuff from the first episode again, they never. So in the game, you have a similar situation happen where like you get caught by Fedra. You kill them, and then you're running away from them. Sort of like what they were doing. Well, in the show, they just kind of give up. They give up on, so one of your men has been murdered, and these people are out there, and like no resources are being sent out to take care of these guys who really aren't that far away.
Right. Whereas in the game, they go after you.
They go after you, and so it's not the infected that are coming after you. Fedra shows up, and Tess gives Ellie and Joel enough time to escape. And so the reason that worked really well is because the game does a really good job of showing you sort of just almost like the inimportance of life in the universe that you're living in. Like it's just, it's so fragile, more so than it is for us these days, right? Because everything works. A lot of this is still pretty similar. The whole line where she's like, our luck had to run out sometime, and the bite's in the exact same place. So that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of this I still really appreciate because they were being so accurate to the story that a lot of people would have known.
Right.
I still think they probably should have kept it Fedra. I'm surprised considering the turn that The Last of Us 2 makes with the infected kind of being just dressing more so than an active threat in that game.
No.
Yeah.
Kind of like The Walking Dead did.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of those little things that potentially is going to happen later on.
Snooze.
But I still think it should have potentially been that way because I don't really care for like I'll say this. I don't really care for the whole like make out thing where the thing, it like comes up to her. I can go to that part since we've kind of gone through a lot of this. Oh yeah, I guess he shoots it and he's like, oh no. And so like all of them know that one was shot.
You see the spore go through the infected underneath the fingernail. I was like, ooh, I just don't like anything underneath the fingernail. That just always gives me the willies, as they say.
Yeah. Zach's saying it's creepy, which is true, but it's just like it's very.
I think it shows one thing that once someone gets infected, that they're no longer viewed as a threat, even if they haven't turned 100% yet.
Yeah.
Because the spores are already in them or whatever, the fungus. And so I think
weirdly enough, isn't that a contradiction though? Because they literally say when they walk in there that the weaker ones fought off the stronger ones. Were they talking about the fireflies?
Talking about the fireflies, the healthy ones fighting off the sick ones. So the ones that
were infected. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah,
I got this. I get why they did it, and it definitely, I think it being creepy works because that's exactly how you want to make the audience feel, is creepy, and also you're showing, hey, once you're infected, you're not really a threat to them. Only the ones who are trying to kill the fungus are the threats.
Yeah. And
I did think it was a bit dumb though that. I understand why they did it. They did it for building the tension using the lighter, but she knocked out all these grenades. If it would have been me, and I'm the one that got infected, I'm getting one of them grenades, bro. We going because it's just simple and easy.
Also, grenades don't cause explosions.
Well, I mean, talking about with all the gasoline and everything there. Secondly, too, with that much gasoline she knocked out, just being able to spark it like that, even though it's a pretty open area. Because the fumes would be so present because you're standing right over top of them, they would ignite. I mean, I understand it's fantasy, but it's still...
Yeah, well, it's just one of those things that's like a lot of people from Hollywood still don't completely understand how firearms and grenades like actually work. Yeah. It's very much more of like a video gamey thing. So it's...
Apparently gasoline, too.
Yeah.
Gasoline is highly flammable.
Yeah. And somehow batteries still exist like 20 years... later in the future. Like I guess someone, there's people that are smart enough to figure it out, but you just kind of have to go with it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, I can suspend my suspension of disbelief for that, and even for the gas thing, I can suspend that. I'm just trying to say, if I'm her and I see these huge grenades and I knock out all this gas, why not just use the grenade? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think now they haven't done it yet. There may have been at some point because of some like knowledge that I have about stuff where some of this is going. It's possible that some of the manufacturing plants, because they mention it in the first episode where the guy says that there's a plant in Atlanta that is they're basically making like Oxycontin and bullets.
Yeah.
So it's very possible. There's enough there that you could potentially believe that there are either Fedra or these other organizations that are across the United States at this point that we haven't met yet. That do exist, by the way. Yeah, I'm not just saying like made up organizations. Like there are organizations across the United States that potentially have access to fuel or the ability to make batteries, like manufacture certain things.
Right.
So some of that may still be possible. But yeah, sometimes it's a little like, okay.
I can see it. I mean, if you have these other plants going, it makes sense.
The big one for me was that I didn't catch this. It was EFAP caught it. They have a helicopter in the first episode.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Isn't that weird?
And helicopters, for those who don't know, they require extensive maintenance. Like they are expensive
maintenance,
and,
a lot of
and
fuel,
hard to upkeep.
Yeah,
they are hard to upkeep.
And they have this one that's like,
I had to sell mine yesterday.
I guess the reasoning was that the fireflies were active, so they were still trying to like take out anyone left in that remaining like cell of the fireflies, and maybe that's why they had the active helicopter. But I was like, I didn't even think about the fact that there was this helicopter flying around. Like this is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic world. Like why are you using a helicopter? Like where did you get this?
Maybe from a military base or something that hadn't been used or that they found that wasn't.
I wouldn't want to be the person flying that thing.
Yeah, what would the infected do to you?
No, I'm not. What do you mean? What would the infected do to you? I'd be worried about that thing just crashing because you're basically trying to keep it put together for 20 years. Like,
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
like,
Yeah, keeping the maintenance on it would be the one thing. Getting the fuel for it, not so much. I could understand that, but
good helicopters these days just crash randomly because people do something stupid. You don't have to worry about infected.
That's too funny.
And that's pretty much the end of the episode.
And again, he held up his rifle right there, and you can see how worn it is and tattered.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, they did a good job.
And the details, they kept the bruising on his hands, the scrapes and bruising on Tess, and so carrying over those small attention to detail. Because you could sit here and we could sit here and say if they didn't have it, well, that's just a nitpick. But at the same time, it's adds, and it flows within the story. You know what I mean? Would it be something that ruined the story if he didn't have, the bruising no more on his hand? No, but
it's details.
Nice
yeah,
addition. Yeah. Nice dish.
I would eventually love, because that's something that we get accused of a lot. Why didn't they just fuel up that?
Zach just made a good point. He said,
yeah.
The room, why didn't they just fuel up the giant truck and drive off? But wouldn't that attract a lot of attention though?
Yeah, I don't. Okay, so we're gonna have to wait and see what the show does. Traveling by vehicle long distances is generally considered to not be a good idea.
That's what I was going to say.
Because you make a lot of attention
from infected and from humans. And I was going to mention earlier, and I didn't.
But he's right though.
Yeah.
There is maybe they could have checked to see if it was a working vehicle, right? Because that's kind of because they decided to change because they decided to change the motive. Actually, the more you think about it. You're right, Joseph. If that thing had a battery in it, it's just like, we don't even need. Is there a battery? Sweet, maybe we can use this. Yeah, and if this one's
there somehow,
if this one's not right, then we can just trade this one for the one that we need.
Yeah. Yep. I think.
Is that right?
Probably the truck they were going to trade Ellie for because they wanted to get to that spot.
This is why they shouldn't have changed that, because he's not looking for a vehicle in the game.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, why does it?
No, Zach, I think you're right.
Even if that's not the specific truck they wanted, they got there somehow. They're meeting them, and they're supposed to get a battery from.
Clearly, they drove that truck there.
And clearly, they drove the truck there. So clearly, the battery it would come to reason that the battery would still be working.
Because it wasn't that long ago. Because it's pretty fresh. It looks pretty fresh with the way that these guys died. Yeah, that's why. Again, you change these. Yeah. That's a really good point.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is why we keep the troll room around.
Exactly. They keep us in line.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it, man. I don't really have much else to say. The show has definitely got some small contrivances, some small things that they've changed that could, they could end up stacking up a little bit more.
Hey, man, series over. He got his battery. He doesn't even have to deliver.
Exactly. Whereas, again, if it had been the fact that they were gun runners, they're smuggling guns, a lot of this illicit stuff that isn't allowed inside the, I want to call it the demilitarized zone, but the QZ, thank you. And then you don't deal with these issues of like, oh, well, here's the truck that you need. Or, it's like.
I really hope they don't lean too heavily into the humans are the real monsters. I really hope that the infected maintain their. Even if they lean into that, I just hope the infected maintain their hierarchy in the threat list. Like, they're the top threat for the most part. And like, maybe you see like these, you have this episode or so of these vile humans that they end up having to team up with because the infected are coming out with, and you know what I'm saying, like certain aspects like that. But I just don't want The Walking Dead, man. Like, I've already seen it. You know what I mean?
I feel you.
I understand humans would be vile and probably even more vile in this environment than we see them now. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Go into that. Just don't be The Walking Dead. And The Witcher, and I can keep going.
The show. So I'll tell you this because I don't think it really spoils anything.
The real monster.
at least in the first game, they do a pretty good job of balancing that stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's different, you have the Fireflies as a faction. There's, I think they're called, I think they're Raiders is what they call them. There is a group that I'm not going to spoil anything for that shows up later, more than likely is showing up later in the season. And I'm really hoping that they manage to pull it off correctly, because it's pretty good. At least when the game came out, it was like that was one of the parts of the game that everybody really praised. And then there are questions kind of surrounding like certain parts of humanity at this point, but typically the infected do remain like a pretty big threat. And so I guess what the show really needs to do is balance it well.
Yeah.
So that you understand that there are these factions out there and they have different motivations for the things that they're doing and how they're trying to survive.
By the end of the day, the existential threat is the infected. Because, yeah, and it's kind of there. The one thing I'm worried about is I think it was in this episode that they kind of talk about how I think Ellie asks about the infected and like how long that they live or whatever. And Joel says, well, some of them, it's a couple days, but some of them have been around since the beginning. For 20 years.
Yeah, for 20 years. Like since the beginning
I think
of
he
this.
said some of them are a couple months, and then some of them have been around for 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, good night.
And so the question is like, could they use that as an excuse to be like, well, it's really not about the infected. It's really about the way that humans treat each other. And some of that is there. I think it's a completely fine trope to use, because that's the thing that we have to be careful about. It's what we talk about all the time when we talk about like themes, when we talk about subverting expectations, like a lot of that stuff. The reason people hate those things is not because they are bad as writing tools. They're bad because people have used them poorly, and then people have praised those things as some of the best like writing / whatever in movies ever.
Right.
And that's where the problem comes in. So it's not that the idea that you have this world where you have the outright monster and then you have sort of the more hidden monster being the humans. But yeah, I think Walking Dead just kind of, they went way too like surface level with that. And so it could be interesting. And that's what I'm hoping they're going to do with this first season, is that there are questions of, were certain choices that were made the correct choice with what we've gathered in this, rather than it. Yeah. You're going to have the like right out, like the evil humans. Like it's just going to happen. It makes sense in the world. What I'm hoping,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
It's more so what you said, balance and maintaining, in my opinion, the infected as the main existential threat. They're the apex predator.
Yeah.
These infected have become now the apex predator over humans, even with the factions.
Yeah.
And everything.
You'll probably get that you'll probably be pretty satisfied with this season. If they, after that,
then next season.
I can't promise you anything, because Last of Us 2, that is the core of that game. Right. It's basically like people are awful. That is the theme of The Last of Us 2. And the cycle of revenge, which again, this is the thing that bad writing can really affect how you feel about certain themes and scenarios within media.
So maybe that ends up being, maybe they change it, and
maybe Neil Druckmann has a change of heart. Yeah, maybe he has a change of heart, and he's like, this is how I make it up to you. Or he's just like, screw you guys, I'm keeping this the way it was. Which, if I'm being honest, it's probably going to be the second one. But listen, we'll wait until it happens.
So far, I'm enjoying the series.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm looking forward to it every Sunday. I'm waiting for the next episode, and hey, that's more than I can say for a lot of other shows. I mean, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy the series so far. It's a really good series.
It's a breath of fresh air from so much garbage that we've had. Even with the complaints that I have with the show, I think for the most part, we're only 2 episodes in, but I think it's holding up pretty well. It'll be interesting to see as the year goes on where it kind of stacks up with some other stuff that comes out,
right?
And how memorable it ends up being in the long run. I'm really hoping, though, that this is a jumping off point for people to do proper adaptations of video games.
Yeah.
that this can be at the very least, that this season can be something that people point to be like, please make it like this.
Yeah.
Make it accurate.
It is possible.
Yeah. This is what people like this thing. Please make it like this. Not Halo.
Yeah, that's an example of how not to do it.
Yeah, a very modern example. Oh my gosh.